And now here's part 2 of our episode. It might be a good time for us to talk about like metal classifications, as much as we love categorizing things on this podcast. Clearly, we've made a venture of it. One of my favorite things about metal music is how many subgenres there seem to be. I always reference elf metal. I don't know if you've listened to much elf metal in your life, but it's like some of the most fascinating specific music I've ever listened to. Not necessarily my bag per se, but like I think I can appreciate it on a multitude of different levels for the community that must have sprung up around it. So Children of Bodom, typically it sounds like they are called symphonic death metal. Is that the technical classification you would put on them?
I guess I would classify them as melodic death metal.
Melodic, okay.
But I mean, there's always disagreement about how to categorize metal bands. I mean, a lot of bands mix subgenres, and I think Children of Bodom is no different. I mean, it's difficult to put them in a box, I would say.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, generally they're known as melodic death metal, but certainly elements of symphonic and power metal and thrash metal, speed metal, kind of all mixed in. Yeah.
And this album sounds, I mean, it incorporates a lot of sound quality that I recognize from other metal albums that I've listened to, and typically very much in the keyboards on this album. You get a lot of, and that makes it really, what's the word I'm looking for? There's something about the keyboards on this one the keyboards on this make me think about the Halloween score, obviously.
Yep.
Right.
Yep.
And so like, I think there's a thing that happens for me when I listen to a lot of metal where I just start thinking about the movie Halloween. Like, and then that's like the immediate thing that comes to mind. Like, what are the elements of this album that you feel like personify Children of Bodom and like are kind of things that are carried through their body of work?
Yeah, it's interesting that you say that, because I was just thinking, like at the start of the track "Hate Me," there's this like like that's like the psycho like sound. Yeah. There's definitely like horror movie like aesthetic kind of with this album, but yeah, I guess thinking more about the sort of different elements. I mean, the keyboards are super important in this band. I mean, the keyboards were a big deal. So a lot of metal bands do have keyboards, although I think many people wouldn't initially think that. When you think of metal, you think of more guitar-based music, but the keyboards are featured so prominently in this band that it's not just like background synth, it's not like, background riffing or something. It's like they're literal solos, keyboard solos. And there's this sort of back and forth between the guitar solos and the keyboard solos that make it really interesting. Like they're talking to each other like that. That's really characteristic of Children of Bodom. I can't think off the top of my head of another band that does it like that. So I think that is one thing, is the keyboards are really a central part of Children of Bodom. Sort of the mixing of the genres, I think is important. So, we've got the death metal element. So like the vocals. So this album uses harsh vocals. So there's no, we call it in metal clean singing, but actually it's just known as singing to the rest of the world. but it's all like of this like guttural, harsh vocals, which characterizes death metal music. So there's that. And then there's, it's very guitar based in terms of the melodies, a lot of influence from, I think, classical music. So like sort of neoclassical sounding, like kind of Mozart sounding, or like Bach kind of type riffs.
Those keyboard lines could easily be on a harpsichord. Easily.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I was getting some real, because I took piano for 13 years and I got some real well-tempered clavier vibes going on there with just the like and preludes and fugues happening. It seemed, if Bach had, been alive later and been an angrier person, like, I feel like he would have fit right in.
Totally.
Yeah. Yeah. A lot of metal really takes from classical music. I mean, I think that's not uncommon. I think this is just really well done in terms of the composition and sort of the layers of sound. Like, you listen to a song the first time and you sort of, you hear something, but you've listened to it again, you hear something else. So that's the thing that I really like about a band like Children of Bodom is there's like certain layers of musical experience. It's like in those cooking shows when they're like layers of flavor. It's like that. Yeah, I mean, it was just really unique. The kind of thinking back to the time period in which this album came out. It came out in 2000, and what was popular at that time was the sort of American nu metal, NU dash metal, and so like Korn and I don't know, System of a Down and Deftones. Like
Deftones.
This is what was popular. It was a risk to put out an album like this, you know. There's nothing like that, the metal that was popular at the time. And instead it's sort of this sort of combination of things that, you know, the thrash and speed and the power metal. And even like, I kind of think about it as sort of being glam in a way, like glam metal elements, like the sparkly keyboards. That's kind of how I think about some of those riffs. It was
especially if it's a reaction too. If it's a reaction to this sort of like less composed, more messier sort of metal that was happening. While the vocals may not be clean singing, like it really does feel clean and tight. There's a polished, real tightness. Very polished.
Yeah. They were professionals, and that's the thing that you see in the Scandinavian bands. And I think it's because they're just so well educated on how to play their instruments. I mean, that's just like a really big part of Scandinavian culture, is like, especially in Finland, like compulsory music education is a big part of you know, their public education system. So these guys can play.
Happy people play music.
They're not faking it.
No way.
So you referenced some of the nu metal bands that were out at the same time, and I have to say, when I was listening to the album, obviously I hear the Metallica in this. I hear Deftones a little bit too in this, especially in the vocals, because I think there's a good handful of Deftones songs where what's his name? I can't remember the lead singer of Deftones, but where he's really, you know, kind of squelching, or I don't know what the correct verb is for it. But I also think of there are moments that sound a little bit like the UK band Muse to me, because just there's that sort of, maybe the symphonic element to it. And I guess I'm wondering, why do you think that bands like Metallica and Deftones and Muse have had so much commercial success when all of the elements of those bands are in Children of Bodom?
That's a great question. So like, why wasn't this super popular? Like, why wasn't this to the level of like, at least, you know, Deftones or something equivalent? I think it's the vocals. I think I think death metal vocals, like if something has death metal vocals, it's never commercially viable. That's what I think. When it's this harsh, I think a lot of people can't get past it. And it is an acquired taste. Like I can understand why people would be put off by that. I mean, it sounds so dissonant and it different, and it might deter some people from actually listening to the music. But I mean, my take on harsh vocals is that I love them. They're great. And like, it's part of when I was thinking about what is the perfect album, I'm like, it has to be something with harsh vocals, because that's what I prefer. And I mean, even though I do like singing, but I think there's something about harsh vocals that really elevates the rest of the composition. Like it really helps highlight the guitar work, which is really what this band is all about. It's about the musical composition. It's not really about the vocal line. And it's not really about the lyrics either, because you really can't understand them.
No, you can't.
You can read them, you can look them up and see what the lyrics are. But I mean, a lot of people don't put lyrics as the most important thing with death metal, because really the vocals sort of function as a percussive instrument, like the drums, and they help sort of highlight the other stuff. So it's really a different way of listening. That, you know, you wouldn't listen to pop music the same way. Pop music, the vocal line is the most important thing, right? That's like what you're listening for. Here, you're not listening for specifically the vocals. The vocals sort of add to the power and aggressiveness of the piece. So That's why I think it probably would never be something popular, is mostly just because of the vocals.
Sure. You get 900 points for that, by the way.
I have so many points. Like
you got
I've never had so many points before.
Yeah, I don't give them out like hotcakes, but I give them out like some kind of cakes. I'm not sure. I absolutely agree. And, as somebody who's not part of the metal scene, I wouldn't identify as somebody who is, and I have not been to that many metal shows. I've been to a handful, but I think for me, I have to put on my ears to listen to metal sometimes, where it's sort of like going to see a Shakespeare show where you're like, okay, I got to kind of turn on the metal receptors, turn on the Shakespeare receptors, and be in that mode where the guitar and the keyboards are doing just as much work as the singing is. Which I think it is for somebody who's not. It is an obstacle to entry for some if you're not immediately drawn to it.
Yeah, I mean, the interesting thing is that this was the first band that I listened to that had harsh vocals. It was like really, I went from like Metallica to this. And, that transition, I think, is sort of interesting. Sometimes we think about Children of Bodom as being like a gateway band. I don't know if you've heard that term before.
It makes sense to me, yeah.
Because I guess in the metal community, Children of Bodom is considered more accessible than some of the even heavier stuff. So
right.
I guess I don't really like that term gateway band, because it sort of is like you would use it to describe a band that you're sort of embarrassed about listening to. Like maybe you were like really into Limp Bizkit back in the day, and like that's sort of embarrassing now thinking about it, but it helped you find some other bands that are actually good or something like that.
Yeah.
I don't like that idea of putting Children of Bodom into that category, because I feel like this is actually good, and that detracts from like the quality of the composition of the music. So, but some people would describe them as sort of a gateway band because they are sort of more accessible, but maybe a bridge to something even heavier than this for a lot of people.
Would the term black metal be more like that kind of sludgy sound, the sort of like that kind of like really low, low and droning sort of, or is that drone metal? There's drone metal too, isn't that? That's a subgenre too, right?
I mean, you can really get very precise with your subgenres.
I'm really into pizza metal. I don't know if you've heard about that.
Yeah, I like cupcake metal myself.
There's goblin metal. This is a real thing. Goblin metal.
I love that.
So, I mean, you were talking about elf metal, but there's goblin. You should check out goblin metal. But yeah, black metal, I think black metal is definitely, I think, like one step in the heavier direction, right?
Okay.
In this, but it's more characterized by like a more high pitched sort of shrieky vocals.
Ooh, okay.
I guess. With I'm not a musician, so I don't know how to describe like the sounds of the guitars, but there's some very specific riffs that I associate with black metal, sort of. And black metal also had this sort of. They really wanted their releases to be poor quality, like in terms of the recording. Like Children of Bodom is different. Children of Bodom is very polished and professional, but like black metal, the idea was to like make it sound bad almost. I don't know how. So black metal has
like there's some virtue in that. There's some virtue in it not sounding too polished.
Well, yeah, and like authenticity is very important in that sort of niche subgenre. Like you have to be truly metal, and only the truest of the true metal bands are worthy. So yeah
I want to go back to what you said about gateway bands for a second, because I think what's interesting about that concept, right? Like we're familiar with the concept because of gateway drugs and all that, and I think sometimes, not to make an assumption about why you don't love that for Children of Bodom, is to say that they are. Did you mention how you said they were? It implies that they're not as good, like that they're. Yeah. Okay. Right. Well, that's kind of how I felt about Muse. To bring it back to Muse, Michael, is that Muse kind of ended up being a gateway band for me to get into heavier music because of only really one song. And what's funny is that Muse has progressively gotten worse and worse as a band, and I'll go on record saying that. Matt Bellamy, come at me if you want. That
happens though. It happens to a lot of bands.
It has tons. Tons. But I do think that it's interesting to see a band that they probably feel as though they're innovating too, that they're innovating into other kind of genres. So respect for that. But maybe that's part of the reason why they have garnered that gateway band moniker, would be that there are so many different things that they've brought in, so many other different flavors that they've incorporated into their sound that have given different entry points to other bands too. Yeah, which is probably, there's a virtue in that, I think.
Yeah. I think that's true. I mean, and that's probably, why we might be sort of embarrassed about some of these gateway bands, is because the quality maybe declined over time, or we didn't really like their newer releases because they changed sounds or something like that. But and I think that might be true of Children of Bodom as well, because for a lot of years I didn't follow them because they kind of changed the sound too much for me, and I kind of was exploring other things instead. But yeah, I still don't like the term, because like I'm not ashamed that I listened to this, because it's still good. It was good then, it's good now, and it will be good forever. So.
The question is, would you be ashamed? You're standing by that you would be ashamed if you listen to Limp Bizkit. That's what you're saying. That's the
right.
That's the point.
That would
okay.
be,
wow.
Yeah.
I think that's
you're safe here. You're safe here, Sahar. No shame in being embarrassed of that. I get it.
That funny thing is, I actually was watching like a recent Limp Bizkit concert, and I was like, this is actually kind of okay. Like, I don't know. Maybe it's the nostalgia. I don't know what it is.
I think System of a Down has kind of aged like a fine wine. I think they
were great.
I think, yeah. They've gotten better.
Also,
it sounds a lot better now.
Some of their music also had that sort of classical sound to it. Like I think about sort of like the riffs that they had, and even like the chord progressions. I mean, again, I'm not a music theory guy, but I feel like there are certain chord progressions that I associate with Baroque music when, like Bach is playing the big old organ and like toccata and fugue and whatnot. And I feel like System of a Down sounds complex and like it's drawing from classical influences. So
yeah. Definitely.
What was a Children of Bodom show like?
Yeah.
Well, that was actually my first extreme metal concert, was Children of Bodom. So a lot of firsts with this album. It's intense. I first saw them in the mid 2000s, and that was sort of at their height of popularity in the US. And so I was not prepared for the intensity of that experience. Like a lot of pushing, like really intense, like the mosh pit. Like I was not prepared for that. I had never been, I guess I had been to one metal show prior. I'd been to an Ozfest, but that was like a festival concert. Like, and it was really, that was like the System of a Down and like the, the bands of the time. But Children of Bodom was it was intense. I guess the things that I remember about at least that first concert experience were not very many women, like me and two others or so, and just really, I was unprepared for the physics of the mosh pit. And how that all worked.
Physical forces at work.
And, I mean, at one point I was like a little bit scared because like the pushing was so intense. I was like, well, this is how I die. Like I'm gonna follow the Reaper to follow the Reaper. Like this is how I go out. Like that's
all right.
Like a little bit morbid here, but
1,200 points for that. Yeah.
I'm racking up the points here, but but yeah, I mean, now I know how to handle a mosh pit. Like I know like how to deal with it, and how to stay out of it, and that kind of thing. But it is really, I would say that metal concerts, especially Children of Bodom, like you walk away feeling inspired. Like you feel the like this amazing energy that you don't get anywhere else. So
is that just because of the music, or is it because of you always have a brush with death when you attend one of the shows?
Maybe both. I don't know. I mean, mostly, I think it's like the experience itself is just, to me, it's so, it's amazing how such dark themes and dark music can make you feel so uplifted. Like that's the way metal is for me. Like it can be doom and gloom, but for some reason it makes me feel energized and better. So
that's definitely uplifting. That's like, there's something life affirming about it. And how could that not How could that not be buoying for your spirit?
Yep.
So we gave you the prompt of bringing a perfect album to us, and we did not define the word perfect for you. So obviously you had to come up with your own standards for that. So what were your standards for perfection?
So the obvious criteria is every song is good. So you can listen to it from start to finish without skipping a track. So this is one of those albums for me that it's perfect in the way that you can listen to it all the way through. And but I think that's subjective. So I mean, I have some other criteria too. So I think it's unique and it's novel in the ways that we've talked about, like the mixing of the subgenres, the quality of the musicianship, the keyboard stuff. I mean, to me, that makes it really unique, and it was really groundbreaking for the time. Very different than what other bands were doing. There are a lot of bands that sound like Children of Bodom now. At that time, this was something new. So I think the uniqueness aspect is what adds to the perfection. And then I also thought about the aesthetic of the album. So we used to listen to music in more tangible ways. We used to I actually have a physical copy of the album here. Mm-hmm. And we used to open this up and page through it and look at the art. And it wasn't just about the music. It was also about what's on the cover of the album. So we've got the Reaper, and the Reaper is in I think he's in Lake Bodom maybe, and he's got these graves behind him. It's very scary, and there's sort of this horror kind of movie vibes through the whole thing. I just love that. It's got a great aesthetic. It's awesome. So that was my criteria, was the uniqueness, the aesthetic, and the obvious. You can listen to it all the way through.
Mm-hmm. No skips. No skips. Great.
So both hate me's are acceptable. The one with and without the exclamation point.
I think one of those was actually like a bonus track, or a single. One was a single version or something like that. I mean, the way albums were released was different.
Mm-hmm.
There were different releases for different geographical areas, and they don't really do that as much anymore because it's all just there.
It's all digital.
Yeah.
I think the hate me, that one.
The exclamation point.
I think that if my ear is catching it correctly, that's probably the single version, because it sparkles a little bit more than the one earlier in the album.
Could be.
A little shinier.
Yeah.
At the gym today, I listened to them back to back, because I was trying to tell what the difference was, and they're both about the same length, and they both start very similarly. And I didn't follow the lyrics because I was doing other things, but I was trying to pick apart the difference. But either way, I was like, hey, if you want to put 2 songs on your album that say "Hate Me," then hey, go for it. I'm not really. Who am I to stop you?
Hate me.
Yeah, I mean, I think looking at the actual physical album, "Hate Me" is only on here once, so I think one of them must be the single version. Yeah, so glad we got to the bottom of that.
That's all we wanted to know. We can end the episode right now. We've got our answer.
Give the people what they want.
Sahar, is there anything else that you haven't said or that we haven't asked about regarding Children of Bodom or Follow the Reaper that you really want our listeners to know about?
I think we've pretty much covered all the important things. I guess maybe the last thing to sort of just mention is that Children of Bodom doesn't exist anymore. They are no longer a band. They disbanded in 2019. And unfortunately, Alexi Laiho, who was really the main composer of the band, composed the music, the lyrics, and was the lead guitarist and vocalist of the band. He died at the end of 2020. So there is no more Children of Bodom, unfortunately. Without him, it can't exist. And
young guy too.
He was
very young,
41, I think. So I mean, that was really tragic, and it made me kind of sad. Not the same kind of sad that you feel when someone you love dies, or you lose somebody, but sad in a sense that there's a lot of my life that's attached to this music, a lot of especially I was 20 years old when I was listening to this, and you kind of when something that final happens, you kind of have to say, okay, the past is over, and this is a problem that I've had in my life where I want to keep going back in time. I want to get in a time machine and go back and, kind of being okay with, okay, that period of time in my life is over. Places I was places, people and places of my youth are, that time period is over in my life. The world changes, relationships change, being okay with saying goodbye to the past. That's kind of what his death sort of represented to me, is like, okay, we can look back on this period of time, but you're never going to get it back. And so you've got to live for now, and you've got to try to, keep going forward. That's sort of what I was feeling when I heard the news. So, so I think, I think that's maybe worth mentioning, is that, I think he still had a lot more to give in terms of music. And it was something sad that happened. So,
yeah, nothing gold can stay, can it?
Right. Yeah.
Rest in power, Alexi.
Yes. Rest in power.
Well, Tyler, should we take a look at the scoreboard?
Let's do it. Sahar, you killed it today. You got a whole mess of points. But this is very serious and very scientific. I don't mind saying that to an economist either. My numbers are airtight, okay? So we are going to run it back. The most recent points you got were 1,200 points for following the Reaper to follow the Reaper at your first concert, having a brush with death, and feeling all the more alive for it. 900 points for harsh vocals elevating the music in death metal, which I think was a very solid point you made. 700 points to Children of Bodom for sampling Exorcist 3 on this album. And why? It's funny. 6 million points for saying that metal is being your most authentic self. And that's definitely my takeaway from today. 5,000 points for academia being pretty metal too. Much more metal than that bank that you were working at. 300 points for the 3-hour car rides between the various cities in the northern Midwest with your parents. And 600 points for being the first person on the podcast to mention Aerosmith. Hope Steven Tyler's doing okay. Hope Liv Tyler's doing okay. I haven't seen Liv Tyler in a minute either.
I hope all the Tylers are all right. Yeah.
So, and then add that to the 11 out of 10 that you gave me for my recap, my appetizer on Children of Bodom. And I think the board's looking pretty strong. Michael, how did Sahar do? Is Follow the Reaper by Children of Bodom, is it a perfect album? Does it go to 11?
I think this is a very solid case, and I have to agree that this album decidedly goes to 11.
Absolutely. Well done, Sahar.
Well, thank you so much. I didn't know I could achieve so much in such a short period of time, but
that's why we're here. We're here making people feel better about their choices.
A Michael Osinski production is always efficient, so rest assured.
Yeah, but it doesn't usually end happily, so I think that's different from my usual theatrical productions.
But you did it.
Yeah, Sahar, thank you so much. I look forward to seeing you on campus at some point. I don't want to know how. We'll have to make that happen in some way.
Yes, we will have to. Yeah.
Now that we're like not even a mile away from each other, probably at this point.
Yeah,
it's a beautiful thing.
It's a small place here.
It's not. It's surprising that we haven't bumped into each other.
Yeah. Yeah.
But before we do that, we have to introduce our standout track, Michael.
Indeed, we do.
What did we choose?
We chose Every Time I Die, which I think is actually, I feel it kind of exemplifies the sort of symphonic qualities of this album. I don't know if it was like a hit from the album or like a single from the album or like a concert favorite, but it sure felt like one from the way when I was listening to it. Can you speak to that, Sahar? Is this a crowd favorite?
Yes, this is one that they played live quite often. Yeah,
love it. We have an ear for those things.
Yeah, it's a good one. It's a little slower. It's a little slower than the other tracks.
I actually kind of like that part about it because it was set up. It's nearly smack dab in the middle, and it sort of set up a little tone shift, I thought, and then kind of the end of the back half of it drives into the next part. So I was I was taken with this one as well. And then obviously, listeners, you should go listen to both versions of Hate Me as well.
Yeah.
Because they both rule. But we'll leave you with Every Time I Die Today.
All right. See you next week, everybody.